All right, this is Barbarian Kings. This has been on my short list since there was a short list. Most of the things when I say they've been on my short list, they're things that like I wanted to do from when I started doing videos. I was like, oh yeah, this is a game I really want to do. And everything else has gotten in the way. And what has it been? It's been nearly 15 years that I haven't gotten to it, which is really kind of a shame. This is the first, I think, fantasy war game that I had. Maybe not the first one I played. I may have played the TSR Battle of Five Armies thing before I played this. I'm not absolutely, no, I wouldn't have. No, this was definitely prior to that. In fact, yeah. And, I had been doing regular war games. I had a few for a couple of years. I had gotten into role-playing already, I think. And then Ares, I started reading about, and I think I picked this one up actually at SPI's headquarters, if I recall correctly. And I played it and liked it enough that I grabbed a subscription to Ares. I don't know if this is the best, well, no, this is not the best game in Ares from my point of view, but it was enough to convince me, and is definitely one of the better ones that I saw. Now, I saw a couple of things, first of all. On Board Game Geek, somebody else did an intro for this quite a while ago, whatever. Probably a better place to learn the rules if you want to learn how to play. I'm going to go over the rules. I'm going to work through them here. I haven't pre-read them. I've played it a few times. I don't know how few. Probably dozens over the course of my gaming life. But it's been a long time, like well before my videos. We're talking probably, I may have played it since 2000, but maybe once or something. Anyway, I also noticed, I'm aware that there was a reprint apparently by Jolly Rogers. It has some comments that indicate that they did a bad job on it. I would not suggest getting something iffy. This is probably cheap enough. You can pick up a used copy of this cheaper than you can get the Jolly Rogers version. And then the final thing is, I noticed somebody in the comments. I look at comments briefly sometimes. I noticed somebody saying something like, this didn't have enough to distinguish it from the other SPI fantasy games. And I have to disagree there. This is very different from, your Swords and Sorcery and most of those other games. Those other games are hex-based games, and this actually has more in common in some ways with diplomacy, in that it has written orders and whatnot. And it's a very nice, light system. I consider this very, very different. However, here's what I'm going to say. Because of the written orders, it isn't all that suitable for solo play. You have to kind of secretly plot things out, and I can do it, but it's probably why I've held off from presenting it, is that I'm really not thrilled with doing a lot of written order stuff. I did La Foi La Glaive because I was so excited to get a copy of that. But in general, I've been staying away from doing diplomacy or Machiavelli or any of my Machiavelli's probably not complete. So, not that this is. I've had to make some homemade counters. You can see there's one there. I had lost a couple somewhere along the lines. I wouldn't be making homemade counters nowadays, probably. I don't know. But everything seems to be there, at least with like replacement counters that I've drawn. There's a couple of those. It has been through a lot in the years. This isn't like, oh, I found a copy of this that I used to like or anything. No, this is the original. And yeah, so I've stayed away from plotted movement type games, and we'll see how that works. In terms of opposed play, I've brought this a couple of times to people to play opposed early on. It didn't get a very high reception from the people who were playing it. Although one of my buddies, and I think he bought a copy of it as well, the only person I converted to wargaming, you know, to getting SPI subscriptions, I think he had a copy of this. Did he? Trying to remember. Nah, maybe not. Maybe not. I'm confusing it with something else. He tried to make a role-playing world out of one of the SPI games, but I think it was Albion, actually. Anyway, still in contact with him. I could ask, but I don't. Maybe he'll watch. Okay, so there's some world history in here that's kind of unimportant. Again, it's an area movement type game. You have economic values of all the different territories in the game that you're going to be producing units from. Different terrain types are on the board. There aren't a hell of a lot. There's woods, there's mountains, there's swamps, water, and land, and that's about it. For the counters, you have a bunch of different counters that follow kind of a standard convention here. So you have 4 numbers on each counter. The bottom left is their combat value. The bottom right is their movement value. Pretty common. In between that is a unit identification number, which you're going to use with the plotting. And then upper left is the cost to build the unit. Upper right is the cost to maintain the unit. The things I remember, man. You have 3 different basic types of units, which are ship units, infantry, and cavalry. There are a couple of special cases. You got whales, airships, and frogs that are kind of special cases. And then each player, and the game holds up to 5 players, has a sort of leadership retinue as well, which consists of a king who's constantly free, a hero who's going to be your general, who provides some advantages in combat. I don't recall what. And a mage who's going to be able to provide you with the ability to cast spells. It is a fantasy game after all. Okay. Hey, this is all spelled out here, isn't it? The costs for mages and heroes is very high compared to that for troops. The rules are set up in a way that Ares tended to do, and a couple of their sort of introductory type war games tried to do as well. So like the Napoleon's Art of War used this kind of rule setup. I don't know how I feel about it. I'm comfortable enough with it, but it's a little bit more verbose and a little less relying on case numbers than the original SPI rule set. But it's still kind of okay. Let's see if we have anything here that I haven't covered. Spellcasters have a magic number. I believe you track that separately on paper. Okay. Now, you'll notice I don't have the game set up with pieces on it or anything. The reason for that is some of the key game decisions happen at the beginning of the game using this starting sequence. Each player's got to have their own little sheets of paper that they're going to track their units on, as they're going to be tracking their leader capabilities on it, and they're going to also be plotting their movement with it. Okay, so you roll a die to see who gets to be which player, well, who gets to choose which player, what they want to be first. And then the first player gets to choose a province on the board. Then the second player chooses a province, and you continue doing this until well, in 2 players until each player has 3 provinces. In 3 or 4 players, each player will get 2 provinces. And again, there's no snake style here, which I think would actually be very helpful in terms of the game. And then in a 5-player game, each player only starts with 1 province. I don't know if that's really wise. Like, I almost think that it might make more sense to do a first player picks. First of all, I think doing a snake style, where the first player picks, second player, etc., and then the last player gets 2 picks in a row, and going back, so the first player gets the last pick overall, is a wiser choice, because there are provinces that are simply better than others. So like Yakash here has a 10 value for taxation. Chessa over here has a 10 value for taxation. Chessa is probably the best location in the game, because in addition to... I was stupid here. In addition to the tax value of an area, you also have what kind of people live there. And there's different types of force represented in each thing. These, I think, are barbarians. These are civilized, elves, orcs, dwarves. I think these are called feudal. Yeah. They're a really weak power overall. Froggers, whales, airmen. Airmen come from here. And pirates, who come from here. Now, some of these starting locations don't really, or some of these locations don't really work as good starts. So for example, Starhome here, even though it has an 8 value, and that may not be very easy to see, but it does, only produces pirates, and they only have 1 thing on them. Whales start up here at the Sea of Whales. Don't worry about that. That's something you're not going to want to start as the whales. They can't even go on land. So, you know, they're just someone you muster within the game. But you could conceivably start with the pirate ships at Starhome. It's not very exciting. You know, what reminds me of this, and I'm curious who wrote this. Let's see where the credits are, because I'm thinking Castikian did something very similar, and I think called it Starhome as well, making it an island. Yeah, this was a Castikian game as well. So he had it in his Dark Emperor game. Something kind of similar to this build here, but, you know, whatever. Reuse is fine. In that game, it is not it's not a pirate haven. It's like a religious place, which is totally different. That's a game that I actually would like to make a role-playing game for. I think that world is very, very interesting. But going beyond that, this one maybe too. It's just there's not a lot of detail overall. Yeah, plot bickering. I love it. So anyway, you choose your 1 or 2 or 3 provinces, depending on the number of players. But again, some of the areas are not very good. Like, some of them have nice troops, like maybe the Swampers in the marsh are good, but you don't want that kind of economic situation. You might pick something like Tharadi to be able to take this, but you probably don't want that to be you probably don't want Dormt to be, or Dormt, to be one of your 2 provinces, simply because the economy is not good enough. There are a lot of civilized areas that have good economies. This introduces some interesting things, because you're all going to be sharing the same counter mix for that race, cultural group, whatever you want to call them. It's hard to tell. Some of them are races, some of them are all human of differences. Anyway. After that, then in the same order as you chose provinces, you take a king counter. There's no difference here. It's just which color you want to be, so who cares? Then each player gets 3 military and magical abilities that they can give to their king, and this is done secretly in ink. Tactical skill, march ability, retreat ability, mind magic, elemental magic, illusory magic, and necromancy. For the magical abilities, you're going to end up having a rating on each of those, and your magicians are going to have one magical ability. So your king can be very powerful as a sorcerer, and your heroes are going to have one military ability, and that's going to give you certain capabilities in fighting. A king can be given multiples of the same ability, which could be useful for various things. Then each player starts with a treasury of 50 bucks. Sequence. Throughout the game, all expenditures and additions are accounted for in itemized fashion, suitable for audit. Double entry bookkeeping only. No, I don't know. In every unchosen province with a taxation value of 6 or more, there's going to be an infantry unit placed in that space. The pirates don't get an infantry unit. I think everybody else who has a high enough value has infantry available. Oh, also in terms of selecting provinces, you probably don't want to take 2 of the same race or whatever, or culture, because you'll have more flexibility by having additional groups. So, you know, the big 10 bucks of the orcs is really nice, but the orcish troops maybe aren't so hot. So you might be better off like picking something else first and then taking them, although that 10 bucks is really attractive. The 10 bucks for the civilized, that's a good choice no matter what. But like if you take the orcs, you might want to take either the dwarves or the elves along with them to have more flexibility. Notably, the orcs don't have any navy because they're landlocked. Okay. I also printed out these maps, which would be useful for some kind of marking to indicate who owns what. That's something that's not... You're going to have to track this separately as well as what units you have and what leader stats you have and whatnot. All right. Next, after you place the neutral units, you start the game. All right. I'm going to swap batteries. I'm kind of low. Let's look at the sequence of play. First thing you do is you plot bickering. You secretly record intentions to cast these spells. These are going to prevent people from talking with each other. Then you sign alliances. Allying players exchange slips of paper bearing their signatures, or one set of slips can be used throughout the game by writing the game turn number by the name whenever the slip's used. These alliances are irrevocable for the game turn that they're in, except if affected by magic. At this point, you execute bickering and harmony. Spells plotted in step 1. I think you do harmony here too. Maybe not. No, probably not. Are then resolved. If an alliance is made or broken by magic, signatures are exchanged or returned immediately. Bickering is going to prevent people from allying. Harmony is going to force an alliance between you and another player, which could be very valuable. Then we hit the tornado phase. Players who have capable spellcasters, what's that going to be? That's going to be elemental magic. Can cause magical tornadoes to appear in specified provinces. That'll prevent them from collecting taxes. Then you get to a financial phase, where you collect taxes, a number of sequins equal to the tax value of all the provinces you control. This includes provinces that you were the last person to be in sole possession of, essentially, and sea areas that you have a unit in. Then you pay unit maintenance, a number of sequins equal to your total maintenance cost of each of your current units that you wish to keep. You can disband any units that you did not spend for. Well, you must. And then you roll for precedence. The high roller is allowed to build as many units as they like first. This is not optimal. The game has some factors in this that I feel could have been changed, where you're like, where you put a bid in on units or something along those lines. Doesn't do that. You roll for precedence. High roller builds all the units he wished first. This privileged moves clockwise around the table until each player has a chance to purchase whatever units they wish to do. Players who have capable spellcasters may purchase illusory units during this. This is kind of an interesting concept. You can build units that aren't really there by casting them with magic. And again, you're limited by countermix, so it is of some importance. So for example, let's say somebody takes, I don't know, Chessa here. Taking Therati is something of a risk, because with 50 sequins, well, they could build all the infantry. Right? There's like, is there 6 or 5? 3, 4, 5, 6. That's $42. They could build all the infantry. And then you're stuck with just higher cost cavalry to build or boats. So there's some definite risk in terms of what goes on here. What I would kind of suggest again is that you plot purchases. There are games that do this, where you put down, I want to buy 3 infantry at 8, and then you both buy them at a prorated value, and maybe if there's an extra, you die for that. Okay. Then we hit the first magic phase. First, there are spells, and I think this is necromancy, that allow you to kill wizards and heroes. If you have the spellcaster, you plot the death of any wizards or heroes, and then, after everybody's plotted any of these down, you resolve them simultaneously. This is any spellcasting, you're going to have a spell skill number, and you roll a die and try to get that effectiveness. We'll get to that when we get to the specifics of the rules, but yeah, most of the rules are actually embedded here in the sequence of play, which there's something very nice about that. Then kill units. Any surviving capable spellcasters can plot and resolve the destruction of enemy units. You plot down which unit you want to attack, you roll, and you kill it. This doesn't really matter whether it's simultaneous. The reason it's important over here is that wizards might be killing each other, and they might both die at the same time. Allegiance. Capable spellcasters can attempt to take permanent control over neutral units, and this is going to be using mind magic. All right. After the magic phase is done, you go to the movement phase. First, capable spellcasters can plot to examine one other player's entire movement plot before plotting that of their own plot, and that is going to be mind magic again. You're only going to be able to use each magic skill that you have once per turn. That's of some importance. So for example, if you plot to do allegiance on a unit, or if you plot bickering or something like that, you're not going to be able to do the clairvoyance with that same skill. Now your king could have multiple instances of a given skill. That's often not a great idea with the magical skills, but maybe some people have different experience than I do. All right, then each player using the ID units of their pieces and of provinces also have an ID, although I probably would use names just because. You secretly record your intended movements on a point-by-point basis as to where you're heading. Then we hit a second magic phase before movement actually is implemented. That's the word I'm looking for. Players with capable spellcasters can cast any of these magic spells. Mind Control, which will allow you to temporarily move somebody else's unit. Stormy Seas, which makes sea areas dangerous. Storms in the Mountain. Freeze Sea, Flood, and Invisibility. Each of these are going to have their own cases. You, again, I think plot these simultaneously and then engage them. It doesn't say it here. Movement execution. All right. Now, you're going to be pulsing through movement. Each movement point, everybody's going to move one movement point. Then everybody moves their second movement point. In some cases, some of the terrain is going to be harder for your people to move through. So it'll cost multiple movement points to do. There's a bunch of... well, not that many. There's a couple of charts here, the terrain effects and the combat results, and a counter scan. Yeah, where are we? Movement execution. So in the first movement point, you spend a single movement point. So if you had plotted to move into, say, mountains, and it was going to cost your units, because they're not dwarves, 2 movement points to move into the mountains, you wouldn't move in the first movement phase. You'd be moving in the second movement phase. The way you'd plot that is maybe with a dash to indicate you're spending the first movement point to go there. We'll see what they recommend. Then you do the second movement point expenditure, third movement point, and any subsequent ones. Spellcasters capable of doing so, though, can attempt to detect illusory units and invisible units, and I believe that happens after all movement. You're not able, I think, to do that during the course of movement, which is important because invisible units could, like, illusory units could stop you, and invisible units could slip through you, which is kind of their point. I think that's the case. I really wish that, and maybe it's the case, that this is actually after each movement phase, there's a sub-step for that. I wish there was. I don't know. Precedence of resolution, each player, okay, this is combat. Each player rolls a die. High roller resolves all of his combat situations, first in the province of his choice in clockwise order. Other players resolve their combats in the same province. Then you restart it for each province in which combat can occur. So basically, you roll dice, and somebody picks, we're going to fight in this province. And if there's any battles there, you resolve them. Then you roll dice again, and whoever the high pick is gets to choose the next province to fight. How important is this? Probably not too important. But it is something that they, built in this kind of mechanism. Okay. For each province in which there's combat, you announce, see, this is, one is precedence. The way this is set up, it's not set up to show you kind of like a, in the way if-then loops would be formatted in programming, which is why I suspect this actually happens after that detect illusions actually happens after each movement phase. The high roller announces his intention to attack enemy units in a given province, or his intention to ignore their presence. Other players announce clockwise from the high roller each of his opportunity to attack in that province. And then you actually resolve the fights and continue on. Then we hit a third magic phase. Players with capable spellcasters occupying provinces in which units were destroyed in this game turn's combat phase may attempt through necromancy to raise those units from the dead. If more than one such spellcaster occupies the province, they roll a die for precedence. Again, if you're not interested in the plotting for purchasing units, it might be kind of nice to use a die roll lets you buy one unit from each nationality type or something along those lines, which would, I don't know. I think that would suit better than just, you can buy all the civilized units and bone, your opponent who has that same culture. Okay. Alliances, only used when 3 or more players in the same game. An alliance is a contracted ability lasting for one game turn. They can neither block each other's movement nor engage each other in combat. Before exchanging signature slips, they can openly discuss their intention to ally with one another. They're bound only by exchanging signature slips, however. In other words, they can double-cross each other. So you can agree to ally with someone, but then when it's time to actually give the markers saying that you did it, you say no. But it's open, so it's kind of weird. If 2 or more players exchange signature slips, they're allied for the game turn. You can be a member of only one alliance in each game turn. This alliance can consist of as few as 2 or as many as 5 players. Alliances require no expenditure, and this is why it's weird. Like, hey Joe, you want to be my ally? Sure. Hey Frank, you want to be my ally and let's beat up on Joe? And we're doing this openly. That is really weird to me, right? Because so much of the game is secret and everything. I feel I'm disturbed by it. Does it make much difference? No, because you're plotting, I think, both bickering and harmony up here in the first step. But Joe might turn and find another ally because I'm obviously stabbing him right in front of his face. You might want to do secret negotiations. I certainly would favor that. If players wish to allow, okay. Alliances require no expenditures, but may be the result of bribes. If players wish to allow allied kings and heroes to lead their units, they must mutually plot which units will be led by which allied leader. So if I let Joe move my 413 orcs, we both have to plot movement for it. Like, I have to plot 413, let Joe move this, and Joe would plot the actual movement. Otherwise, it's just not going to take place. So he might tell me that. Okay. And actually, you wouldn't be plotting by a unit because you can only move things with a leader. If plots don't agree, the temporary control is not exercised. If through magic or mistake a player becomes a member of more than one alliance, then all those alliances are voided for all members. I'm not sure how happy I am about that, right? So if I plot harmony and create an alliance using magic, I feel like that should take precedence over an alliance that was agreed to. Again, I may tweak the rules to my liking in a number of ways for this game, simply because I don't like the idea of, you know, I'm over here, somebody's over here, we agree to ally just to prevent ourselves from being forced into an alliance we don't like. That doesn't feel like it should defeat the magic, right? It makes the magic useless if you play by the rules as written here. Okay. But if two people magic successfully to make me their ally, that would discard it. Unless they're allied to one another. When combat occurs in a province, the forces of allies are considered as one player. The players have to agree and write it into their movement plot which of their leaders present will lead any fight and has the choice on whether or not there's going to be a fight. If no commander is named, then the allies in their province may not attack, but they defend as one force if they are attacked. Finances. Pretty simple here. At the beginning of the finance phase, you count up which provinces, the points from each province that you control. You can use these sequence to maintain and purchase units and to bribe other players. And I assume the bribery, we haven't gotten to whether it's handled in the rules or not, but I assume it's just sort of passed to the person at such a time during the diplomacy or whatever. Player controls a province if at least one of his units occupies it, or was the last to occupy it, or if he controlled it since the start of the game and never lost control. Allies do not upset or contest controlled condition of a province. Indigenous neutral units do prevent you from controlling a province that they occupy. You have to destroy them. The presence of a leader or a wizard does not constitute control. Units are purchased and maintained for the cost shown. The limit on the countermix is a design limit. You can purchase leaders of other players' faction if desired. Now, you don't want to do this if you have your own, but remember, you get one person in the base rules has precedence over what they would buy. Similar situation would go, I would make all of these one faction if I'm doing that kind of faction-specific pulsing or something along those lines. Okay, wizards and heroes are assigned an ability when they're purchased. The abilities are the same ones that the king has. They're split into magical abilities, which only wizards have, and heroic abilities, which only heroes have. Makes sense. Movement plot, execution, and block. Units and leaders have their movement plotted each game turn. We won't go into all the specifics of how to write that. When traveling, but we will go into the general. So, I mean, it works as you would expect. There are specifics to make it, to nail down the rules, but we don't care about that. When traveling without units, leaders and wizards can enter any type of province at a cost of 1 movement point per province. However, if they have units, they have to spend movement points as the most expensive move for any of their units. Leaders can move any number of units. Wizards cannot lead units. Wizards and leaders may not end their movement at sea unless they're on a boat. And there's no limit, not a whale. And there's no limit to the number of kings, leaders, and wizards that can be in a province. Should a wizard or leader enter or remain in a province without friendly military units, and that province is occupied by enemy military units, a king is captured and a wizard or hero is eliminated. A captured king can't be used by the captor, but he can be ransomed, sold, or traded to another captor or held indefinitely. This is a pretty big thing to lose. You do not want to lose your king. A leader with march ability has an increased movement allowance of 5. If a king has a duplicate or triplicate march ability, am I right about the movement allowance of units? Yeah. These things have a movement of 4, that's why. Okay, let's keep going. If a king has a duplicate or triplicate march ability, his movement allowance is raised to 6 or 7. Units traveling with such a king have their own movement allowances increased by 1, 2, or 3 for that move, as long as they spend, I mean, they're going to spend them all with their one leader, so no biggie. No unit leader or wizard may move directly from an enemy-occupied province to another enemy-occupied province, nor to an enemy-controlled province. Units may move from a vacant enemy-controlled province to an enemy-occupied or controlled province. Note also that units cannot be blocked by neutral units or enemy units from leaving the province in which they began the game turn if the province they move to is not enemy-occupied. So far we haven't had anything that like says neutral units block you at all. Let's keep going. But each province is characterized for movement by some basic kind of terrain it has. That'll be on the terrain effects chart. We could look at that. It's going to be by type of force and type of terrain. Some units have special movement abilities and restrictions. Fleets can only enter sea provinces and coastal. Makes sense. The 3 coastal provinces have 2 separated coasts. You're going to have to, so like Thoria here, you're going to have to indicate which side of the coast you're on. And so you can't, you know, teleport across or anything like that. Fleets can each transport 1 military unit and any number of leaders or wizards. If they begin their movement in the same province as the units to be transported, the land units may not move by land in the same game turn that they're transported over sea. Doesn't cost them any movement points. It doesn't cost anything for the fleet to embark or disembark. Airships can enter any province at the cost of 1 movement point per province. They may not end their movement in either sea or mountain. If forced to do so, they're eliminated. Airships may transport land units in the same manner of fleets. So there's 2 airship counters. They can each carry 1 unit. You're not going to see a major air force going on, but there's some possibility there. War frogs can move through 1 sea province per movement phase. They may not remain at sea and are eliminated if forced to do so. When coming ashore, they pay only 1 movement point regardless of the cost that they would normally pay for that province. And they only pay 1 movement point for entering swamps. Whales may never enter coastal provinces, only sea provinces, which makes them kind of an interesting choice. Dwarven units pay only 1 movement point to enter mountains. Elves pay 1 movement point to enter forests. If you want to avoid plotting movement, they wrote a system for doing this. I think that spoils the game. But let's take a look at it. Roll for precedence. The first player makes those moves constituting the expenditure of the first movement point for his leaders, wizards, and units. Then the second player makes his first movement point moves, and so on until each player has moved all the units or leaders their first movement point. Roll for precedence again and make the second movement point move. And any 2-point moves, the movement phase proceeds on the basis of rolling for precedence before the expenditure of each. It might work. The drawback to this system is some of the surprise and mystery will be eliminated from the game in order to avoid the tedium of plotting. I suspect most people play this way. If they come up with the answer of, certainly the person who says there's not much difference between this and other SPI fantasy games, although the other ones are all hex-based, you know, and pure I go, you go and everything. This one was very, very interesting with its plotted movement, plotted pulse movement. This is really not sufficient to explain it, though. So one of the things is, let's say I have, I don't know, an orc here who I want to move into the mountains. Well, my first movement phase I wouldn't be moving, but what I really should be doing is marking that I've spent 1 movement point going into this. I would think, if I'm playing with this option. And then the second one would get me in there, or maybe I could just back away and go to something that would cost me 1 movement point. So I have to spend like I should have to indicate that I'm going into the mountains, I think, if I use this option. All right, combat. But that's not specified. So then you'd have to mark that somebody has a movement point that they haven't used, or some other mechanism for doing it if you don't do what I have. So as I was trying to imply, this option does not fully cover what you need to do to play the game that way. Okay. During the combat phase, you can exercise your option to have combat with enemy units that are in the same province. Combat is not plotted. You announce your desire, and then it automatically ensues, regardless of who initiated combat. The simplified ratio is stated from the point of view of whoever has the larger force. Okay, so you don't have like 1 to 2 combats. The odds are always X to 1, and then they'll be rounded in favor of the smaller force. No force can participate in combat with the same enemy force more than once in the same combat phase. They can have combat with each enemy force in the province one at a time if the player so wishes. The restriction against having combat with the same force more than once per game turn applies. Each force in the province is considered an integral value and must be used as a total in combat. If any leader of a force has tactical ability, the column is shifted 1 column in their favor. Those are going to cancel out as needed. Combat can take place in sea provinces exactly as in land provinces. And you add both the land and sea unit strength points together. Which might seem a little weird, but if you look at like medieval combats and whatnot, and ancient sea combat, the troops on board the ships did fight. You had a lot of grappling and stuff. Honestly, I think they should be reduced to like a point each, and some things that are very strong combat value are probably, overrepresented, but it's what it is. When all player-initiated combat in a province is finished, a neutral unit in that province then has combat with any forces, starting with the high roller that did not already have combat with it. Okay, so they will attack you. I think they block you too, even though it says enemy units here. When called upon to retreat by the combat results table, you must conduct the retreat under the same strictures as a move. If the force cannot legally retreat into the available provinces, then it or parts of it is eliminated instead. The owning player decides which province or provinces his losing units retreat to, unless the opposing leader has retreat abilities greater than that of the loser, in which case the victor gets to decide. This is all retreat ability does. Forces may never retreat into enemy-occupied provinces. Land forces may embark onto ships in order to retreat. Oh, and again, ships are able to fight on land on coastal regions. Leaders with net retreat abilities greater than 1 never have to retreat their own force. Now, this can only be a king who has a net retreat value of greater than 1, unless you're playing with some options that don't exist. If opposing leaders net out against each other, it's as if they had no retreat ability at all. A superiority of 1 retreat ability allows that leader to retreat the loser. A superiority of 2 or more allows a king to ignore all retreat results. And we'll see the results of combat are things like X player retreats, X player half eliminated, which does not result in any retreat, or X player eliminated. And X being smaller or larger. Okay, we're up to the magic section. Since I've had to pause this video once already, let's do it again. Okay, out of all the SPI fantasy games, I think this is actually my favorite. I'm just thinking about Albion has some annoying facets that I would really like it if it didn't, like, the actual gameplay bogs down and gets ugly. It really does. I like the concepts of it. This isn't my favorite fantasy game by a long shot in terms of war games. I definitely like things like Dragon Pass and best of all, Scandinavia. It is the best fantasy game out there. But Swords and Sorcery, it's got this silliness, and it's the hex-based combat. The old War of the Ring just wasn't. It didn't catch me. I like the Fantasy Flight one or whatever a lot better. Although the cards are hard to read. I'm trying to think what else they did. But it's kind of an indication of how weak the fantasy war game genre was. Out of stuff Avalon Hill printed, well, look, I mean, they reprinted Dragon Pass, so that's good. Wizards is good, but it's not really a war game. I'm thinking things like Wizard's Quest was pretty damn stupid. Dragon Hunt was kind of cool. I don't know. Someday I'll do a best of the fantasy war games. I don't know. I haven't, it's kind of hard because it's so weird that this magazine game is actually beats out most of what I ran into. And then also the genre, unlike like the World War II and World War I genres that I've done, the genre of fantasy games, catches me into Euro type stuff and things that just feel very different. I don't know. Things that are hard to judge is this type of game. All right, on to the magic. Only wizards and kings who've taken magical powers may cast spells. Each wizard has a knowledge of one of the 4 branches of magic assigned when he's hired. A king may have knowledge of up to 3. Each spellcaster has a magic value of 2 in each branch that he knows to begin with. Kings can take the same branch multiple times, in which case they have 2 or 3 separate magic values for the same branch. A spellcaster can only cast spells from their own branches of magic. Each time they attempt to cast a spell, you roll a die. If it's equal to or less than their magic value, the spell succeeds. You can see spells aren't very powerful, but let's go on. If the roll is a 1, though, your magic value increases by 1. If it's a 6, your magic value decreases by 1, and they never increase above 5 nor drop below 1. And you have to keep track of what their magic value is as it changes. So there's some possibility that your magic may get better, but it's probably not going to get much better because there's a negation as well. Okay. Some spells have a cost and sequence that have to be paid if the spell succeeds. Each spell has a specific time when it can be cast. And by the way, the spells are listed here as to when you can do them, in case you don't want to have the sequence of play open. I find the sequence of play actually pretty useful in this compared to the little phase record here. A spellcaster can attempt to cast only 1 spell per game turn from each branch of magic. A king with double or triple magical ability he can cast them multiple times. He also keeps track of the magic value for each of his skills separately. So let's say I have 2 double necromancy. I would start off with necromancy 2, in terms of skill level. And when I use one of them, the other one may have a different chance of success. Okay, let's look at the magic. Clairvoyance, time of casting, movement, plot phase. Cost nothing. It allows the player to see the plotted moves of one other player before he plots his own. If 2 players cast this on one another, neither can see the other's plot. Mind control, during the second magic phase, which is after move is plotted but before executed. Costs nothing, allows you to take control of 1 hero owned by an enemy player. During the movement plot phase, the casting player has to plot movement for that hero. After the plot phase, he determines whether the spell succeeds. If so, the casting player's plot is executed during the following movement phase. The hero reverts to control of his owning player at the end of the movement phase and may not turn units over to the controlling player's leaders, nor may he attack units belonging to his owning player. Because he gets turned over after movement execution, the combat phase, the original owner has control. So just maybe what they mean is, nor may he block units belonging to the owning player. That would make more sense. They may just be trying to clarify that you can't mind control somebody into attacking someone else as an extra word, though. I would say he can't block either, because the specifics of block are who owns the unit, not who's writing the orders for it. Cause bickering. This is in the alliance phase. Plotted in diplomatic orders. Doesn't cost anything. Prevents any one specific enemy player from allying with one other specific player. Wow, that's painful. It would be kind of nice if you could just say, look, these are the players you can't ally with. But nope, you can only pick one. Big difference depending on the number of players. If you're playing in 3, blocking someone from allying with the other player is very, very powerful. If you're playing in 5, there might be multiple options for alliances, and yeah. Harmony, time of casting alliance phase, must be plotted. Okay, you do indeed have to plot it. This spell forces a specified player to ally with another specified, possibly the spellcasters. Yeah, I would think so. Cancels out bickering. Okay, so this is the thing. Bickering doesn't cancel out harmony. So my assumption is harmony just forces an alliance to happen, regardless of whether somebody used bickering successfully. But it might be that they just cancel each other out, depending on how you want to do it. Allegiance. 5 sequence per unit allows the caster to take control of any number of neutral units permanently. In case of conflict, you roll for precedence. This is very powerful early in the game. Later in the game, there are no neutral units, or there are very few. So, you know, it gives you a purchase cost of $5 per, which is not a bad price for decent units. It's a pretty crappy price for like orc infantry, but might be important. I gotta swap batteries. All right, so that's the first type of magic, which is mind magic. A whole bunch of different spells you can do. Elemental magic. Stormy Seas. During second magic phase, after the movement is plotted before it's executed. It doesn't cost anything. You specify 2 contiguous sea provinces. All naval units in those provinces are immobilized. No fleets, war frog, whale, or airship may move into those provinces. Plotted movement into them is aborted, probably without whatever their follow-ups are. Units controlled by the casting and allied players are not affected. Lasts for 1 movement phase only, i.e. 1 turn. Well, you can still fight in there. Leaders and wizards are not affected. Yes and no. Leaders and wizards can't walk on water. So they are affected because they can only move in conjunction with a boat or an airman. Neither of which can do it. Storms in the Mountain. Time of casting second magic phase, same as before. As above, applying to mountain provinces and land and air units. Dwarven units, however, are not affected. They can move through the mountains. And again, here, leaders and wizards truly aren't affected. So that's what this sentence is for. It's because we're going to follow it elsewhere. Floods. Immobilizes all land units except war frogs, leaders, and wizards in a single and province, there should be an L there, for 1 movement phase. Any force moving into the provinces is also immobilized. No combat may take place in the province. This is new. This is different from the others. Units controlled by the casting and allied players, as well as leaders and wizards, are not affected. Again, this is different. The Flood is a more powerful capability because your own units aren't impacted. Why? I don't know. Freeze Sea, but I don't think I'll remember it. Also in that second magic phase, makes a single sea province impassable to all naval units and whales. Do storms affect whales? I know they affect air units. All naval units are immobilized. No fleets, warflog, whale, or airship may move. Yeah, this affects whales too.
Any such units in the province are immobilized, and any movement into the province is aborted. The province becomes passable, however, to land units. Effects end after the movement phase. Any land units in the province at that time will drown. Swamp provinces can also be frozen. This doesn't affect any units within. It just becomes a plains province for that movement phase. Tornadoes. Prevents collection of taxes from any one specified province for the current finance phase. I very seldom see that. This is a really iffy power to use it for that. But if you're not planning on using your elemental magic for movement purposes, hey, why not? Illusory magic, another branch. Illusory units is in the finance phase. It costs 1 sequin per unit. The player must announce that he's casting the spell, but not which of the units he purchases are illusory. He may create any number of illusory units at a cost of 1 sequin per unit. The ID numbers must be noted on scrap paper for later verification. The illusory units remain on the game map, but if forced to engage in combat, they're removed before combat's resolved. They do not prevent an enemy player from building units because of countermix limitations. That's important. If you wish to build a unit and none are available but illusory units of that type are on the game map, you can require the owning player of an illusory unit to remove it from the game map so you can construct it. And I guess you dice off or something. Like maybe you get to pick a specific enemy and say, hey, do you have any illusory units at this time? You have to buy them though. in order to find this extra information out. This is a tricky and iffy rule. Like, looks like one of my batteries needs to be dealt with. Okay. Illusory units behave as a regular unit until removed from play. Invisibility. Second magic phase, again just before movement, is actually implemented. This costs nothing. The spell is cast on one friendly leader. That leader and any units, wizards, and other leaders he moves with are removed from the game map. They are now considered invisible, and the casting player must keep track of their position on a piece of scrap paper. It should be present on their plot. If the leader drops off any units, they become visible and are placed on the game map. If he picks up any units, they become invisible and are removed. The invisible force may not be blocked by an enemy force, but they may block enemy movement. The invisible force may not be attacked. If the invisible force blocks enemy movement and attacks an enemy force, it loses its invisibility and is returned to the game map. Otherwise, the invisibility is permanent. Units hired in a province containing an invisible force may be added to that force without first being put on the game map. Notably, they can take control of spaces as far as I can tell. This is weird. There's some tricky shit in here that's going to be hard to cope with. Like I said, the illusory units, the invisibility. I don't tend to use these because they are so tricky to use. Again, playing solo at least. Detect illusion. Movement execution phase. This spell is cast at a province. If there are any illusory or invisible units in the province, the owner of those units must tell the caster of their presence, type, and number. Wow, that's not very useful. I mean, look, you might not know where their forces are and what they're up to, but I really can't see spending your magic on doing that. I can see it on making illusory units, definitely. Invisibility feels like it's kind of weird, but might be very powerful. But detect illusion, you have to guess where they happen to go. And then you get an answer of whether it's right or not, basically. And that's it. There's some fucked up shit here because, like, with both illusory units and invisibility, and I just felt like this wasn't worth playing with because it was too complicated in terms of how it would be implemented. The rules give you an idea of what you would need to do, but they are pretty damn iffy in the sense that, like, I don't know how you deal with just the mechanical aspects of coping with them are going to be very tricky in a lot of different ways, and they just felt kind of like a shitty choice. So I may avoid picking any illusory magic. as I usually have. Necromancy. Kill wizard or hero. Time of casting, first magic phase. It costs you 8 sequence. Remember, that cost only counts if you hit. It causes a specified wizard or hero to be eliminated. Kill units. Again, in the first magic phase. Costs 5 sequence per unit and eliminates those enemy units. These don't have to be in one province. Now, 8 units for a wizard or hero, it's less than it costs to build them back. 5 units for a unit, again, decent units, it's worth doing. It's not worth killing orcs this way, generally. Raise units, this is done in the third magic phase. It's the only thing that's done there. It doesn't cost anything. If you're in a province, this is a nice one. If you're in a province where combat took place in the preceding combat phase and in which units were eliminated and the spellcaster's force did not retreat, all eliminated units may be raised of both sides. These are now zombie units and controlled by the caster. They must be maintained at normal cost. If a 6 is rolled, not only does the spell fail and the spellcaster's magic decrease, but he loses as many units of his non-zombie force as he tried to raise. If he attempted to raise more zombies than units are present, he loses them all.
The zombies eat your units.
All right, how do you win the game? In the 2-player game, the player must control provinces with total tax of 120 or more at the beginning of the game turn. In 3-player, this goes down to 100, and more players, it's 90. I'm a little iffy on that. I may convert that, especially since I'm playing solo and I'm not worried about people getting knocked out or whatever, to, hey, let's just make it 120 across the board, even if I'm playing with 5 players. I can always quit if it becomes obvious that one person just has a significant advantage over the other. But the thing is, once you knock somebody out, you can't really knock somebody completely out of the game, but you can knock somebody out in the sense that they have no provinces and you're holding their king, right? And once you've done that to someone, now, you know, you're down to a lower number of players. So you kind of want the victory conditions to keep increasing based on the number of actual players still playing the game. Which, you know, kind of like diplomacy, you have to take over half the production values. Here, I think the 120 is probably half the production value on the board. I don't know for sure. I could add it all up and see. The game may be ended before one player fulfills victory conditions with the mutual agreement of all players. Well, that's useful. We all hate this game. We want to quit. Nope. The rules say you got to keep going. No. You know. In this case, the players may unanimously concede the game to one player or a group of players. Whatever. You know. I don't think that was really necessary. Steve Tihor is in the playtesting group here. He did, as far as I know, I know what he did. He did a computer game that handled like a really detailed plotted movement interactions in the medieval era. But it was based on, as far as I can tell, a game that I've been wanting to get I've been wanting to get for a while. It's not a game, right? There's not a workable game there. It was called Popes and Princes. And it sells for a stupid amount of money for something that never actually worked as a game. But there were very few copies of it, apparently, and it's one of them rarities that I'm not willing to buy, but it had some neat ideas in it that I wanted to implement. It's basically like somebody's sketch, notebook for a couple of ideas that would work in like a game. But in this big multiplayer, online submitted turn orders type game. There were a bunch of them that came out at one point. Not so much online at first. They were play-by-mail games, and then they translated much better over to online. It had like weekly turns, and you plotted out where your guy was going and what he was up to. And I think I lived with the Pope in that. I didn't end up playing because I didn't have I wasn't online enough, but one of the guys I was living with was playing, I think, the Pope. He somehow convinced
the guy, Tihor, I think was running the game, but he certainly designed it. I think he convinced him that he would make a good pope, and just got to be that. I played a later variant of that, I think, again, that was converted to a sort of automated game, where somehow or another you kind of got assigned a place in the game at random. And I think you kind of did in the other one, but my buddy was like very, very sociable and managed to convince the guy GMing it that he would be a good pope, and got that plum position from that discussion. But I was kind of happy in the game that I played that I think was based off of that, but in a more automated form, where I got to be something. I got to be the Prince of Amber, essentially, but it's like an actual title in France, as opposed to, from the Zelazny novel. Anyway, that's what we're looking at here. I'm going to make my attempt to play it, and to make up, what rules I need to make it work better for me. There's no question that this is not 100%, filled out. And there are some places where I'd rather not. I mean, I think the game does work as written. I have certain desires that I would rather do within it. And the big problem is really just going to be having to handle it all on note paper. Maybe I'll play with that option. I don't know. I feel like the game is a written orders game at heart. And there's something that just belongs with that. Anyway, I guess we load this up. Again, it's been a long time getting around to it, and I'm really pleased to do it. In terms of actual rules, this is, I'm sure, a longer-winded than whoever. I know the other guy, I've seen his videos before who covered this. And if anybody has the Jolly Rogers version, it would be interesting to hear more about whether it's any good or anything, or how well it manages to reflect this. What I saw in the comments, was there weren't a lot of comments on this game, and there was one comment that I noticed, which was that they seem to have butchered it somehow, but then they made it sound like it would have been great if they put minis and all kind of stuff in it. I'm like, no, not really. This is a fucking plotted movement game. So maybe the being upset was that they were too faithful in the original presentation. Who knows?